Good morning, guys. So today's topic is tissues, organs, and transport systems of plants. Hope you guys can remember that last we talked about cells, mitosis, meiosis, and so on, how cells replicate, and also hope you guys remember all the organelles that are within cells. Okay, so when we have a group of cells, we have a tissue. In this case, you can see an individual cell next to another cell, next to another cell. Okay, so a group of them gives you a tissue. Then when you have groups of tissues, we get an organ. In this case, it shows you a leaf. It could be a leaf, a stem, even a root in the case of a plant. Okay, and then your group of organs gives you an organ system. Okay, so here it shows you a leaf structure. And that is a organ with another organ next to it, the stem. It doesn't show it, but the root's another one. So a couple of organ systems or organs together gives you an organ system. And all these organ systems together gives you the organism, ultimately. Okay, so if you guys want to follow through in your books as well, I will be going through the pages 60 to 62 and then 69 to 87. These have to do with plants, okay, in your books. So first of all, we will be looking at meristematic tissue. Okay, so the groups of cells that gives you the meristematic tissue. Okay, so basically what this is, you get apical growth. Apical refers to the top part, and then you also get lateral meristematic tissue. That is the lateral growth. Okay, so in the stems, it will make the plant get broader to the side, and the apical meristems makes the plant grow upwards, and also in the root's case, it makes the root grow longer to the bottom. Okay, here they just show you representation of this. There's an example of the root. Here they show a large picture, and this is the root apical meristem. So with the root hairs, they also elongate because of these meristem tissues. And at the root cap, the most bottom part of the root, it also elongates because of these tissues that replicate. So meristematic tissue, they keep on growing. Mitosis is happening all the time. These cells are replicating, so they are elongating this stem cell, the stem. Okay, the same thing happens at the top of the plant. So the stem keeps on growing upwards because a cell division keeps on happening. So the plant is becoming taller and longer as the cells replicate, and so that the leaf grows taller. And that just shows you what the top looks like, and this is through the microscope what the apex or the top of the plant looks like when it grows. So here new leaves will be forming, and this is the top. The apex of the plant, apical bud. The cells here are replicating in the shoot or the stem. This is the stem. It will grow taller upwards. This is under the microscope a picture of the stem, and as the root, and how the root is elongating to the bottom. Here is tiny groups of cells as they are dividing and replicating. So they are becoming more and more and going to the bottom. Okay, so this is the meristematic tissue. Secondly, we have your permanent tissues. Okay, so underneath the permanent tissues, we have three other types of tissue systems. First of all, the epidermal tissue. So if you look at this diagram over here, within the leaf structure of the plant, this is your seedling, then you have your large plant when it has been developing. So when you look at the leaf, a cross-section of the leaf, there are three groupings within this permanent tissue. Okay, so the outside of the leaf would be your dermal tissue, or the epidermis. Okay, so the inside is the ground tissue, and at the middle, these blue dots, is your vascular tissue system. Okay, so basically your dermal tissue, the epidermis, is the top layer of cells that protects your leaf. And also note that within the leaf, within the stem, and within the root, can you see the bundles of these tissues differ? Here it looks like a cross in the middle, which what the vascular tissue forms. And here it looks like maybe a cross section of a watermelon with the pits in the middle. And the leaf looks different, maybe like a plane. Okay, so each memorize what each of these vascular bundles look like, because I like to ask this in exam. Okay, so with the leaf, this is it's always on the outside is your dermal tissue layer, epidermis. The inside is your ground tissue, meaning it gives the body of the leaf, or it gives the body of the stem and root. And then way in the middle is your vascular tissues. Okay, so the vascular tissue is primarily your xylem and phloem. But firstly, let's start with the epidermis tissue. Okay, on the outside, the yellow bit here. Same with the stem, the outside, the epidermis layer, and same with the root, the outside. There are primarily two things that form part of your epidermal tissue, and that is your guard cells. Here we have a picture of a leaf, and on the outside, and usually on the bottom of the leaf, because remember, the guard cell is basically holes, and it allows for carbon dioxide to go in and allows for water to go out, as well as oxygen to go out. And it's underneath the plant, usually, because as the sun shines on the top of the leaf, it will increase the loss of water. And some plants, like in desert circumstances, don't want to lose lots of water. They want to preserve water. So that's why these little holes on the underside of the leaf, it prevents excessive water loss. Okay, so basically these holes can actually open and close. So in this case, this is what a closed stomata looks like, and this is what open stomata looks like. Okay, so these cells, one cell at the bottom, another cell at the top, guard cells, together they form stomata. Okay, then secondly, we have our root hairs. They're also part of the epidermal tissue. At the bottom of the root, you can see the root system, and there are tiny, tiny little hairs protruding from each root. And here it is represented. So when the roots are here, close-up look, these are the cells. And we can say that this pen root would go past here. And these are the individual cells that protrude outwards. And they are there because they give a larger surface area to absorb water for the plant. Okay, moving on, we get to the vascular tissue. Okay, as I mentioned in the previous page, the vascular tissue would be these blue dots, or in the leaf, in the middle there, and in the root would be this X, and that is your xylem and phloem. So basically, what it does, vascular system xylem is the transport of water. So it usually goes from the root upwards to the leaves. That is how water is transported. The phloem vessel system have these sieves in them, and it's for the transport of food. Okay, and there are cells, companion cells next to them for the storage of food as well. And it shows here the arrows two ways. Okay, that is how food can be transported upwards and downwards, depending on whether the leaf needs the food, or the stem needs the food, or the root needs the food. Okay, so the food system, they can go either upwards or downwards. But with the water system, xylem, water can only go from the bottom to the top. Okay, and thirdly, we get our ground tissue. And the ground tissues are those three, the parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. Yes, it sounds like very bad words, but you guys have to remember each one of them. Fun tip to remember, the parenchyma, they have thin cell walls. They are tightly packed. You guys can see in this picture, tightly packed next to each other, and their main function is to store food and also used during photosynthesis. So basically, photosynthesis is that mechanism whereby the plants make food. Okay, then secondly, the collenchyma, they are not as tightly packed as the parenchyma. And they also have uneven cell walls. You can see these guys look more elongated. All of them look the same kind of, but these are bigger, smaller, not all the same size. And their function is to give flexible support to the plant. And thirdly, your sclerenchyma, they have thick walls, And can you see the spaces? It's here indicated in pink, but there are large air spaces in between the cells that are not as tightly packed. And they give strength and support to the plant. Okay, then I need to just highlight there are differences between plants. You can either get a monocot plant or a dicot plant, or the longer words dicotyledous and monocotyledous. What it just means is when plants differ in the sense of when they germinate from a seed. You guys can see this is the ground or the soil. It was a seed, and when the seed germinated, the baby plants came out. There are two types of baby plants. One with two leaves that form as soon as it germinates, or one leaf that comes out. So monocot means one leaf, and dicot means two leaves. Okay, so primarily we will be looking at the two-leaved plants. Okay, something like sunflowers, for an example. Okay, so firstly we want to look at the tissue structures. With the dicot plants, which I mentioned in the previous picture, you can see with the leaves, the cells are packed differently. Each individual cell to form your organ looks different within the leaf, within the stem, and within the root. Okay, this picture just shows a bit more detail than the previous one. Okay, if you take a cross section of each. So within the plant, the cells are packed together differently. Okay, so first of all, let's look at the leaf as an organ. Okay, so your groups of cells give you tissues, and the groups of tissues give us now the organ, the leaf as the organ. Okay, so primarily the leaf is where the food are produced during photosynthesis. I apologize. Then first of all, at the top of the plant, this will be looking at the sun. Let's say the sun is up here, and this is the bottom of the leaf. Okay, so the top part would be the epidermis, the epidermal tissue layer. Then your ground tissue layer will be the inside of the leaf. Here at the bottom will also be another epidermal layer. Okay, as I mentioned previously, the guard cells or the stomata at the bottom, because we don't want to lose too much water. And your vascular tissues is here with this arrow. This will be your xylem and your phloem together. The middle one would be the phloem, the one at the outside will be the xylem. Okay, so they together form the vascular tissue system, and your ground system is on the inside, as I said. Okay, so right underneath the epidermal layer would be your palisade layer. These cells are closely packed, and they are photosynthetic cells. Why? Because they are close to the epidermis, here where the sun shines. So usually the sun shines right through these cells that are in the epidermal layer, and it goes to these palisade cells. Okay, so they produce the food usually for the plant. Then the rest of the ground tissue layer would be the spongy layer. It also includes the vascular system. And it's loosely packed. You see the large air spaces in between the cells. Sorry. And it allows for gas exchange. So the CO2 comes in from the guard cells and moves around through here in between these cells, and it can also enter these palisade cells to be used during photosynthesis, because for photosynthesis to happen, we need, first of all, carbon dioxide coming through with the air. We need carbon dioxide, and we need sunlight coming in from the top here to produce food, to produce oxygen as a byproduct, and also the food, the sugars that the plant needs. Okay, so this is the function of the leaf. Very important where photosynthesis is being used. Okay, here's just another transfer section of a dicot leaf. Okay, this would be your vascular bundle. Here's your xylem, where the water is transported, these little vessel keys here. And here at the bottom is your phloem, where the food is being transported. Okay, up here is the epidermal layer, and then here's your palisade cells where photosynthesis happens. Here's the open spaces, and here's a stomata where oxygen, carbon dioxide can come through. Okay, and this is also the lower epidermal layer. Okay, then we look at the root as an organ. Okay, so if you have transverse section through the root. Remember, we're under the soil now. So the outside is also the epidermal layer or the epidermis. Then you have your tightly packed cells over here. Remember, no photosynthesis happens in the root, so it's not needed for palisade cells. Okay, so, and here's the vascular bundle. In the middle would be your xylem, forming a kind of X here, and your phloem on the outside. Okay, here's just another picture of what it looks like. Here again is your X for the xylem, and the phloem is this light blue around it. This is your ground tissue all around here, all the cells making the ground tissue, and your epidermis on the outside. Closer look here again, xylem, phloem there in the light blue. Okay, then looking at the stem as an organ, again a transverse section through it. Here you can see again the watermelon image. So always remember, if it looks like a watermelon, you're working with the stem. Okay, so the transverse section. Here's also a few hairs they show, even if it is the stem. Just looking back at the, root as organ, here are the root hairs. So also if you see this funny structure with these projections, know that you're working with the root as well. The hairs and the X indicates the root as the organ. Okay, then the stem, again, watermelon picture. Here, the xylem and the phloem is spaced very interestingly. The xylem are on the inside. Here is your pith or the parenchyma cells, the ground tissue on the inside. Then your cambium vascular bundle is in the middle, and the phloem are looking to the outside, this area here. And next to it is a bundle of sclerenchyma cells. Okay, so the cambium structure, vascular bundle, is actually a solid structure that prevents water from going through it. So because you have your xylem here and your phloem there, we don't want the water unnecessarily to mix with the food that is being transported. So this cambium bundle actually prevents the water from going from the xylem to the phloem, so as to keep them separate within the stem. Okay, then here's another picture underneath the microscope looking at the stem. This is actually what it looks like, the inside of the stem, and here's your bundles, vascular bundles, xylem on the inside and your phloem on the outside, and your cambium part in the middle, separating the two from each other, and your epidermal layer on the outside. Okay, here they also show you the key. Dermal is the light blue, the ground tissues are these with the yellow, and the vascular is obviously these round, the pits of the watermelon, if you can put it that way. Then with stems, as I mentioned with the meristematic tissue, it keeps on growing, it keeps elongating. The cells, they replicate the whole time. So with the stem, we get growth. When you have the stem looking like this, say this is a 1-year-old plant, it looks like this on the inside, but give it a few years, it starts looking like this. The circles multiply. So if you look here, this epidermis here is this part here. You can see that this is the xylem, but now the phloem is way over here as it has been growing. So this band, this green band, shows 1 year of growth, and the next band also shows another year of growth. Here it shows secondary phloem. This is also part of the phloem, but it's the 2nd year of growth, and this is your secondary xylem. Here it shows. And so all these rings actually show you how the plant has grown over the years. Each year it gets a new circle actually in its base. If you take a cross section of a tree, this is actually under the microscope what you will see. The ground tissue here is in the middle, the xylem would be around here, and then each year, this is within a season. So the next summer it grows. This is the entire growth for a year. Then when it gets to winter, this dark ring is actually what happens, because during winter the plant doesn't really grow. It does grow a little bit because it's still alive, it's still living, but then it doesn't really elongate that much. It doesn't grow thicker. So within the winter, it doesn't really grow. These cells are packed close together, but then as soon as the next summer season comes, it starts growing again. It elongates until it comes to another winter session next year, and it doesn't really grow. And these cells are packed together closely, and that's why it looks so dark. And then within the next year, it grows again. So in this case, just what we can see here is this plant is actually around about 3 years old, because it has 1, 2, 3 circles around the base of the tree. If it was a tree, it could be a plant, maybe sunflower as well. These rings will just not be that broad. It will be broader in the case of a big tree. Okay, but this we call secondary growth, because the stems are thickening or widening. Okay, then we go to transpiration. So with transpiration, what happens, the water is in the soil, obviously, and then as the plant is growing, it needs this water as well for photosynthesis to happen and for the plant to keep on growing. So water is absorbed from the bottom, from the roots. It travels through the stems and it goes out through the leaves due to transpiration. Okay, so what happens, the sun shines and heat builds up on the top of the plant. And like humans, let's say they're sweating. They need to sweat to get rid of all that heat. So then the water droplets that form on the stomata, in this case would be actually the bottom of the leaf. The water goes all the way to the top of the leaf, and because of the heat, the water is sucked out of the leaf and goes into the air. And as the water is being sucked out of the leaf, this actually stimulates the water to keep on going from the bottom into the roots, up into the stem, and again. So it's this continual, it's not really a circle, but it keeps on being pulled from the bottom to the top, because of the sun. As soon as nighttime comes and the sun isn't shining anymore, transpiration does not occur, because there's no force that drives this. There isn't any heat now that pulls the water from the roots through the stem to the leaves. Okay, so taking a closer look at transpiration, what happens at the bottom here is the water is literally taken up through the cells in the roots. Okay, so they enter here. This is the proximity of a facsimile of a root hair. It enters the root hair, goes through all these cells and into the xylem. From the xylem, it's being transported upwards, 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 and all these water molecules are being kept together, close together, based on cohesion. And cohesion is when the water molecules, they stick close to the side of the xylem cells, or the xylem vessels. They are being attracted to the sides of the xylem vessels. And the cohesion is between the water molecules and the xylem cells, and adhesion happens between water molecules. It's these attractive forces between one water molecule and another water molecule. So these attractive forces also cause them to make like this one continuous string of water. The string won't break. These attractive forces can keep them together. So it's like this string of water is being pulled out from the soil to the top of the leaves. Okay, so they're being kept together. Here we come inside of the leaf of, in this case, a tree, and the water is being, because of the sunlight and the heat that's on the outside, they're being pulled by this heat force to go out, so to go through the mesophyll cells in the leaf structure, and then they exit through the stomata. In this case, the stomata is open, so they can leave here, and they are being evaporated out through into the atmosphere. And that, in a nutshell, is transpiration. So, what is the purpose of transpiration? It's necessary that the plant relies on it to supply water, obviously, for the entire plant. Water is needed for photosynthesis, and also the roots absorb water that contains minerals. Minerals needed to feed the plant as well. And then when evaporation happens at the top here, and the water leaves the plant leaf, it also cools down. Like I mentioned, it's like sweat for humans. We get rid of some heat and the plant cools down. Okay, a couple of factors actually can attribute to transpiration. Transpiration can actually happen at a slower rate or at a faster rate. For it to speed up, if the wind is blowing, that's one thing that will speed it up. If it is a very humid day, it would actually slow down. Humidity means there are a lot of water molecules in the atmosphere. If there is a lot of water molecules here in the atmosphere, transpiration will slow down because there is more water outside of the plant than inside. So it means that the rate would just slow down. Okay, then with your temperature, higher temperatures, obviously transpiration would speed up because the attractive forces of the heat and the sun makes it go out quicker. And then also light intensity, how more intense the light is, how brightly the sun shines during the day, it can also speed up transpiration. Okay, then we get to your leaf structure during water loss. As I mentioned, when it's a good day, there's a lot of water in the soil. The plant can go on, it can, with gravitation, with these forces, the water goes into the roots, stems, and leaves, and with transpiration being pulled out of the leaf the whole time. And what happens then, yeah, it exits through the stomata, and photosynthesis can happen, and it also loses water. But look at this plant. It's a very healthy plant. All the cells of the plant are turgid. And if you guys can remember, turgid cells mean that it is, well, let's say it's a fat cell. There's a lot of water. This is your water vacuole. There's a lot of water inside the cell. So the cell has a good shape and it has a high turgor pressure. In a day when there is not, let's say the sun is very hot, there's not enough water inside the soil, the hot sun is evaporating all the water, and there isn't more water to go in. So the plant loses water. And as soon as there's less water inside the plant than outside, the cells, here it shows you, there's not a lot of water in the vacuole. So what happens, the cell structure actually collapses in on itself, and it becomes flaccid. Flaccid just means there's a lack of water inside the plant cells. So when it is wilted, all the leaves, they kind of look crumpled and weak, and they start to fold in on themselves. And what then also happens is the stomata actually closes to prevent more water from going out, also to prevent more carbon dioxide to go in. So photosynthesis also decreases. This plant is actually, in a way, actually dying. So if this keeps on happening, but as soon as more water comes into the soil, the stomata can open again, transpiration can happen again, and more carbon dioxide can be absorbed. Okay, that's basically the process of wilting. Then also, remember, here's important what happens to the leaf structure or the plant structure when there is no water. So remember the plant cells, what happens to them, and how the plant looks, and what happens in the case where there is not enough water for the plant to absorb. In other cases, when there's actually too much water, let's say the plant is healthy, there's a lot of water being put into the soil, maybe through irrigation, and the sun is not as hot, so transpiration isn't really happening, but it's a nice cool day. Maybe the clouds are covering the sunlight. Then cutation can happen. This is actually the forces of the water. As I mentioned, the water chain that's inside the plant. The water is so much at the bottom here, and it keeps on being absorbed by the roots, but it's not being evaporated. So what happens, and in some openings on the side of the leaves, the water actually are being pushed outside, and then we can see that as water droplets. And it's not the same as dew. Dew happens early morning, and the water droplets are usually on the entire surface of the leaf. But with cutation, the water droplets are only on the edges of the leaves, in the open pores of the leaf. Okay. Then we get to what happens when water is being absorbed through the roots. Okay, so from the ground to the xylem vessels. Okay, so basically when you have the water is on the outside in the soil, it goes into the root hairs, into the vacuole of the root hair cell, and it goes from vacuole to vacuole to vacuole with these cells in between until it gets eventually to the xylem vessels. Okay, and as you can see, this is the bottom of the plant. So from the bottom, root into the xylem vessel, and up it goes because of transpiration. So these attractive forces take the water all the way up to get eventually to the leaves. Okay, but there are three different pathways how the water can enter. Yeah, I mentioned from vacuole to vacuole. So this pathway is the vascular pathway. But there are two others as well, the symplast and the apoplast. The symplast route, here in blue, shows you it goes in through the vacuole. But it's actually with the ground tissue. This one doesn't really show you. It's not the vacuole, it's the ground tissue. So it sidesteps the vacuoles. It's not exactly in the middle. It's just on the outside of the vacuole. So it's in the ground tissue. Symplastic route is through the ground tissue. And then your apoplastic route would be through the cell walls. As you can see here, all through the cell wall, not even entering really the cell. From cell wall to cell wall, and it can enter certain cells to the ground area, but it goes primarily through the cell walls until eventually it gets to the xylem vessels. Okay, so they just know there are three pathways: through the vacuoles, through the ground tissue, and through the cell walls, well, the wall of the cell. Symplastic and apoplastic. Okay, then we get from how the water moves then when it's already in the xylem vessels, from the xylem vessels to the leaves. Okay, so I'm going to start on this side. We mentioned what happened here. This is the plant. It's the root. The leaves are up here. Okay, so we already went through this through the root hairs, through the cells, through the xylem vessels. Upwards it goes, water is drawn up into the stems, and here it can go upwards to other leaves maybe, and this is say the lowest leaf. Water moves along the xylem into the leaf, and then water evaporates into air spaces into the spongy mesophyll. The mesophyll here is where there are air spaces in between the cells, and here at the bottom is the stomata. So water vapor can escape through the stomata and is being transpired. Okay, so the bottom is the stomata, and the top is your the palisade cells. Okay, so it's basically drawn from the bottom all the way through the stem to the top of the leaf where it's being evaporated. Okay, here's just another representation of it, what happens from the bottom to the top. Okay, then lastly, we look at translocation of food or minerals. Okay, this is basically how is the food that's being produced in the leaf up top here, and the root at the bottom here. So what is the food type that plants make is usually your glucose. It's sugar basically. So the building blocks of the sugars is the glucose. So the glucose can be used to form sucrose. In this case, it's using sucrose, and the sucrose is being transported through the phloem. So in this case, it wants to feed the roots. So it's going from the leaf through the stem to the root. But what is happening here? The xylem is on the side next to the phloem, but water from the xylem can actually go into the phloem, and it helps transport all these sugars to the bottom. And as soon as the sugars enter the other cells to go to the root cells, the water goes back into the xylem. But as you can see, the water can only ever move from the bottom to the top. But in the phloem, the water can move downwards, okay, to help with the transport of all these food. Okay. And it's important to remember that this food, also known as the plant sap, is obviously soluble in water, and it's important because it has this fructose or sucrose or whatever the type of sugar is that is being transported can either be used here, so it can be broken down into its smaller parts, glucose, and utilized by the root, maybe further grow as the cells elongate, or it can be stored in companion cells or even inside root cells for later usage, maybe in the form of starch for longer storage. And it can also, all this food, like the sugars, can be used to produce other types of organic compounds, like your proteins and your fats as well, that the plant needs to grow. Okay, so in a nutshell, that is what happens within the plant.